Welcome to Extra Takes, hosted by Northland Church Senior Pastor, Dr. Joshua Laxton. Join us each week as Pastor Josh reveals the rest of the story behind his sermons. We'll discuss how those who follow Christ can live out a biblical vision for the church in our world today.
Well, hello, Northland family and friends. Welcome to another episode of Extra Takes. I'm your co-host, PJ, along with Matt Shiles. It's good to be here, Matt.
Yeah, I have a question for you.
Today's Monday, right?
It is.
Okay, yes.
So we're not supposed to call you KJ.
What's KJ?
King Josh?
That's funny, yeah.
PJ.
Yeah.
Pastor. Not King.
Not King.
See, I listened.
Yeah, you did, yeah. My family won't even call me Dr. Josh.
Yeah, why would they?
I don't, well, I mean, they should. I got a PhD. I worked hard for that.
Yeah, they should.
So I can't even be doctor. I can't even be doctor in my own house. So no king, no doctor, just pastor.
Hey, you.
Hey, yeah, hey, you. That's what we're moving to hey, you these days.
Hey, buddy.
Hey, I'll answer anything, I guess.
Oh, so how you doing? It's Monday.
It's Monday.
Got a group in?
I got a group in from Tennessee, and we're actually going through a lot of what we've been going through because I like to start we're talking about worldview and talking about engaging the culture, but just really starting from the very beginning and walking through. And we've only been together for an hour and a half so far, and seems like they're, really learning. A lot of them said that they just want to have a deeper understanding and knowledge of the Word, and so we're definitely giving them that.
So what are their ages, and then what's
18 to 25-year-olds? Yeah.
Awesome.
Yep.
It's from a church?
From a church, yeah. I have a friend who's the discipleship pastor there, and they're doing kind of a week-long retreat, and they had asked me just to do like a session, and I'm like, well, listen, if you want me to do more, I'm happy to, because like I told them this morning, like, I love 18 to 25-year-olds because they really are the present future of the church, and I do believe with all of my heart that the church in America, the church by and large in America is really unhealthy, and they're going to outlast me, and I just want to make sure that I invest in them, that they have a good, solid framework, understanding of the Word, of the story that they're in, and how it actually intersects with every area of their life. And so I'm like, hey, I'll spend the whole week with you if you want.
That's wonderful. So let's dig into this week. We're in week 4. At some point, you're going to lose track of the weeks.
Yeah. Because I'm building. Here's the thing. I did say that kind of very funny and tongue-in-cheek. But eventually, I won't say, hey, we're in week 8, we're week 9. I'm building somewhere with because as you can tell, like, I'm not going verse by verse yet.
No.
Because I'm giving you these big concepts that are in Genesis 1 and 2.
Right.
And then when we get to Genesis 3... and we'll get to Genesis 3 right before Easter.
Okay.
We'll in some sense, then go more verse by verse.
Section by section, verse by verse. Okay, great. So this is week 4. This is making sense of life, and this was all about image bearers, how God establishes and expands his kingdom. Genesis 1:26 through 28. And as a reminder, the bumper video, I just love these questions. Life is full of big questions. It says, who are we? What is our purpose? How did the world become so broken? Can what's wrong ever be made right? And where is all of this heading? And that's what Genesis does for us. You began by kind of taking us back to the first 3 weeks as a reminder about the first week was Genesis is the beginning of the big story, not just a big story, but the big story. Second was Genesis reveals Elohim as the creator king and the main character. And then finally, last week, it was a temple text where God creates a house and makes it a home. So this week, we had the main point, which was humanity was the crescendo of creation that was to establish and extend God's home, a.k.a. kingdom on earth. In this outline, you asked 4 big questions: who image bearers humans are, why image bearers were created, what image bearers do to fulfill their why, and how image bearers will accomplish their why and what. So let's start with these 2 questions I tried out for you last week. We're going to try them again. Can you describe this week's message in 1 word?
Humans.
Oh, that's different than I thought you were going to say.
What do you think? What did you think?
Image bearers.
Well, that's 2 words.
Well, there's a There's a hyphen.
Yeah, I know, but
I was going to challenge you on that, actually. I was ready for that.
Yeah, there you go, humans.
Humans. Okay. And what's the biggest takeaway you received from this?
The biggest takeaway is, I don't think I've ever connected, and that's what made it a little bit longer. But I never connected Adam's threefold role and responsibility all the way through.
I see. Okay.
And that was the biggest, because a lot of times there's the concentration on Adam being priest. And again, I'm not the only one, saying too that he's a vice regent, but the focal point of taking that we needed a leader to live and lead. Now I've talked about this idea that we need a leader, and I think I even did that in the Iron Faith series. I know I talked about a coach. You need a coach.
Yeah.
But to chart it through in terms of the king, the priest, and the prophet, and in some sense bring it to home, even how it impacts us today in the church, is that Jesus is our king. We are all priests, but God has assigned some to be pastors / elders. Like, they're synonymous. And here at Northland, we say that pastors are paid, elders are lay. I mean, that's how we, kind of unpack the differences, just because of how Northland has been structured for years, so even before I got here. So, so that was probably my biggest takeaway. And there was something, too, that I wish I had time to do, which would have been a good takeaway as well. But you know how we had looked at a couple of weeks ago the characteristics, the attributes, and the nature, which we did embed it here. So there was some kind of reminders. But I wish I would have, because I'm actually doing it with the group that I have in town right now. Okay. I'm listing all of God's characteristics, His attributes, and His nature on this kind of left-hand side. Okay. And then I'm actually creating quadrants of relate, create, and operate. Okay. Because what I want us to think about, how in our relationships can we be more communicative? How in our relationships can we be more life-giving? So what I'm trying to do is actually create more of a framework so that you can kind of understand even more of how in your relationships you're mirroring and representing and reflecting God's kingdom.
So all of those would fall into one of those quadrants?
Yeah, so if you think, so life giving would have its own, so you're thinking, how can I be life giving in my relationships? How can I be life giving in my creation or my creation mandate? How can I be life giving in my operation?
So all three, relate, create, and operate, would connect to every single one of them.
Well, not, and so what I mean, life giving would, but maybe communicative. Okay. And maybe communicative, benevolent. I mean, what benevolent would,
Maybe
so that's where I'm wanting. I wish I had a little bit more time, because that was. I'm like, this would be actually a great framework to create, just so that people then begin to think even from a granular scale of going, okay, am I relating in my marriage in a manner that actually reflects and represents God? That because again, that's my big takeaway is that we are called to represent, reflect, mirror. And so to even think more deeply about that, how I wish I would have thought about that. I would have tried to put something at least in a quick little framework to show, but I didn't get there. I actually...
A lot there, though.
Huh?
There would be a lot there.
Oh, my goodness.
That whole chart would be massive and just so in-depth.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So you're doing that. When did that come to you? Because you're doing that this morning.
Yesterday, yeah. Okay. I'm like,
sermon's never done, is it?
No, it's never done. I'm like, well, I wonder if I could show that at the very beginning of the next time I preach.
Interesting.
So we'll see.
But the next time's
but and that's where it never ends, because I'm always constantly thinking, how could I have communicated that better? How could I have made that even more? When I say relative or connecting, and so it's never done. I'm like, I wish I would have done that.
Well, that's interesting, because you've probably preached on this passage a lot.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But again, this is where, in a series format, I haven't. Going through it in these big concepts, because now, this is the fourth message, and I've added, in the sense, the big story, Elohim, temple, now image bearers in the temple, and reflecting, representing, and so, and that's why And again, the struggle was, I knew it was a lot of content, but if you've been here, it's a lot of it wasn't new. Now there were a couple, the replicate, the inflate was a little bit new, and then I think the king, the priest, the prophet, at least understanding Adam that way was new. So I felt like it was, but I'm trying to put it all together. Mm-hmm. And that's where I really do see myself do I have elements where I preach? Yes, I have elements but I really do see myself, I want to teach.
Yeah.
I'm wanting people to understand this, which involves a little bit more to it sometimes. Mm-hmm. And obviously this week it did.
Yeah. Well, and you talked about the supporting actor. Yeah. And just that idea of the supporting actor is not the central focus of the story. Humans play a significant role, but not the central role in the big story. That kind of hurt my feelings. No. It's not a popular message.
No, well, what happens when we feel like and want to be the main character? Well, we're living in it. We're living in what happens when humans want to be the main character.
You're talking about the fallenness, the brokenness. All the mess that we create for ourselves, or
yeah. And then that's where if you think about it, just think about just just the American political scene for years. And again, I'm not just saying that take the snapshot now, but it's all about sides. It's all about what one side believes should happen, the other side believes should happen, and they want to be they want their politics, their way of life. That's simply what politics means, is just their way of life. They want their way of life to be front and center. Okay, well, so when you're competing for what is front and center, well, this is what you get.
Sure.
But if we would have kept, this is the thing, if we would have kept what God wanted to be front and center, himself, his kingdom, his glory, you wouldn't get this, because he would be the main character and he would be the one consistent. Anyways, neither here nor there.
I think that's where the idea of Jesus ushering in a new politic is so very helpful in that framework, because so often we are presented with, in our system, there's two options, right or wrong, black or white. And as believers, we're saying, no. First of all, we know we live in a world of gray, but no, we're actually called to live in a new politic, and this is where that idea of kingdom that we continually revisit is really, really helpful.
And it's not even, when I say it's not even new, is old. Now there are some now different elements, because we have strangers, we have those who are far from the Lord. We live in a foreign land. So in the garden, nothing was actually supposed to be foreign, which is why when the serpent came in, that was the foreign element that Adam was supposed to knock out.
Yeah, into the Holy of Holies. I never considered it that way, and how heinous that was. For in terms of Adam being the priest, right, and letting the serpent even be there.
Yeah.
Right. Wow. So let's look at that first one. Who image bearers are. And you actually talked about it later, but this quote, I think, connects to this point. You talked about our culture is absolutely confused as to who humans are. Many don't know why they exist. Talk more about that.
Well, when you look at the confusion around are human beings equal with animals? Well, no. From a Christian worldview, no.
Yeah.
But we have people that want to save whales while also killing babies. No, that's demonic. And then you have this idea of how we treat one another. I'm like, if we really understood the Christian worldview, the biblical worldview of humanity, we're not going to treat people like dirt.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things actually was telling this group that's in town is like, all right, so we're meant to reflect, right, God's kingdom. Okay, so God is, and I never put this because, I could have just kept on adding to the list, but I'm omnipresent. So God is omnipresent. He can be everywhere all at once. We cannot be. Well, so therefore there is a limitation to us as human beings that we cannot be with everyone all the time at once. So therefore there's always going to be those elements where we have to choose, like, well, who do we hang out with? What will our group be? But that doesn't mean that just because you have a limitation that you treat people like less than humans.
Sure.
So, yeah. But anyways, that's just a way that kind of works. But yeah, so we're confused even how we treat one another. It definitely goes against the viewpoint that is touted by philosophers like Richard Dawkins, that we're just gene machines, lumps of cells. I mean, like, right. Because then, another thing that it would go against, like, we're confused. Okay, so, now because of technology, we can now even see if there's going to be any deformity, any special needs, varying exceptionalities with the babies. And so now you have doctors going, well, do you want to terminate the, and so it's like, just because there might be an element of special needs, you still have the Imago Dei stamped on every human being. Yeah. Like, no, we're just so confused because now human beings are actually prescribed a value to society through what they're able to contribute, versus what DNA is stamped on them, that they are fearfully and wonderfully made. Yeah. So I think there's just so much confusion as to who human beings are. You got people that are confused that they want to be a cat. And so that now that, it's been this way for actually, at least 15, 20 years, furries. Yeah. If you don't know what furries are, I would say Google it, but you don't want to. It's just people wanting to be cats, and humans acquiescing to them and creating litter boxes actually in schools. It's just, again, demonic as to, what's happening from a confusion standpoint of human beings.
So how should we look at image bearers versus children of God? What's the difference?
Yeah, so because I would say, and given the fall, given the sin and the rebellion of Adam, that we are image bearers. Every human being is an image bearer with that intrinsic value and worth and dignity, but that does not mean they are a child of God anymore. Because when Adam and Eve rebelled, they were kicked out of the garden. Mm-hmm. But that's why, the New Testament would talk about adoption and redemption and deliverance, is that there's now this invitation back home to be a child of God. So like in John 1, you read it, and I'll just read it so that you know that I'm not, again, making this stuff up. I hope you would think I would never make, this stuff up. But what you read in John chapter 1 is... Okay, so the true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. Again, that's actually an allusion back to Genesis 1. Yeah. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet, to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. So what John is saying is that those who are not of Jesus are not children of God. They are, again, I would say that definitely they would be image bearers. Yeah. Even Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, which I read in the Message, talks about us being fashioned in the image of the earthly man. Well, again, the image of the earthly man, Adam, still had intrinsic value and worth and dignity. Yeah. So when sin entered the world, it did not dissolve or eradicate or do away with the image of God on our life, but it did alienate and separate us from our Creator King, from our Father. And so that's the difference between an image bearer and a child of God.
That's great. Let's look at that second one, why image bearers were created. And you talked about three ways that image bearers were used. And then you gave us this wonderful definition of humans' purpose. He says the purpose of human beings is to establish and extend through representing, reflecting, and mirroring God's rule and reign on earth. Where did that definition come from?
Just building it from what's going on.
Was that new this time, or had you used that before?
I don't know. I'd have to go and look. I didn't, here's the thing. I did not want to, because I've done this passage a lot.
Right.
I did not want to look at what I did before.
Okay. I was wondering.
Now, sometimes I do.
Because there are some times where it's like, this is really helpful that I'm just going to use it again. But you kind of like started from.
Well, obviously, relate, create. But I don't think I've ever defined human beings' purpose. That I don't believe I have.
But you built this week in a way that like you hadn't preached it before.
Right.
Fascinating. Yeah, when you gave that definition, I wasn't sure if you had either, but man, when you talked about even that question above, many don't know why they exist. And I think even for a believer, sometimes I don't think we live in a way that's just on the tip of our tongue.
No.
Right?
No.
So,
well, and this is part of where I'm like, there's a part where I have this holy indignation.
Okay.
Where we have, in some sense, and I grew up I grew up in a place where I grew up in a church where, yes, they taught the Bible and they taught spiritual truths, but they didn't teach a story.
Yeah.
That made meaning of why I went to school.
Yeah. Right.
That you go to cultivate.
Right.
And so when I look at this and I go, man, I'm so upset and here's in some sense the reason why, because you have to understand the history. So for the first 300-400 years of the church, they're living out this. They really are. They're living out this new way of life. They are living out the kingdom of God. Mm-hmm. In the midst of the kingdom of man. They knew Rome was not their home. They knew that. Mm-hmm. And they knew that they were to position and posture themselves in a way for Rome, but also against Rome.
Yeah.
Because of this new politic that Jesus is conquering through love, Jesus is conquering through grace, Jesus is conquering through redemption and deliverance and restoration. He's conquering through new creation, and then a whole new way of life being ushered into every area of our life, which is why the church during the reign of the Roman Empire, they would care for orphans and widows. They would care for the sick and the vulnerable. They would not, even though they would not proclaim Caesar as Lord, they still would, in some sense, work for the common good of Rome. You had this true new way of life, and then the church in around 380 begins to play a major role in the empire, to the degree later on where the church would become the center of the Roman Empire. And so for really almost like 1,000 years, you have the church being the center of civilization, at least in the West. Mm-hmm. Well, so from then on, at least in the West, there's this concept of what in some sense academics would call Christendom, where everything revolved around the church, and so in some sense all of life was considered Christian. Mm-hmm. But there were so many, again, there were so many, and that's where you even have the Reformation with Martin Luther and John Calvin. There was so much even wrong with the abuse coming out of the church, and really a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of heresy coming out of the church, and they wanted to reform the church. And even Luther wanted to bring back this idea of creation mandate, that we need the milkmaid, we need but there was still this kind of notion where the church was the center of society. And in some sense, every area of life revolved around, when I say the church and Jesus. Well, but then in the 1700s, 1800s, and 1900s, you had modernity that came about. You had this idea of enlightenment that came about, that in some sense I'm being very general with this, but there was this mixture now of science and in some sense faith, and as that kind of evolved, as that relationship evolved, and then this is where you do get in the 1800s, 1900s, you got some philosophers that want to kill off God, but yet you have this kind of Western notion that we have this Christian worldview. And over time, what has happened, definitely in the 1900s and now 2000s, the church has been very poor at articulating a true biblical and Christian worldview of a storyline of kingdom, and what does that mean, and how do we like, and so now we are living in a day and age where it is so important to get back to the roots of actually what it means to be a child of the King, what it really means to be an image bearer, what it means to actually represent and mirror God's rule and reign. Like, it's so important. And so there's a part of me, I'm saddened, but I'm also infuriated with a lot of the church that we're not teaching this, and that they're not connecting the dots.
Well, that seems to be what really drives you.
It does. Yeah. To almost the part where I'm okay with people not even wanting to be under my teaching because they just want some nice little sermonette. Like, because again, like, I want people, and this is where I'm always constantly thinking, what are other ways because I think it's just that important that we understand this big story. We understand the elements of this big story. And we understand how it actually intersects with our life. So,
well, that leads to that third question about what image bearers do to fulfill their why. We have relate, create, and operate. You actually added two.
Yeah, and again, I've talked to them, but yeah.
Replicate and inflate. Did you use inflate in all three? Because the 9am, I'm not sure you use that word. You use like expand and...
Well, I did. Well, inflate is it's the alliterative of create, operate.
Yeah, you like that.
Yeah. So it helped, what was that other word? Inflate.
Yeah.
Replicate, inflate. Yeah. So
I have to work on that one.
But inflate actually, but I had to look up the definition. It actually does mean expand. So when I wanted to bring a balloon...
Yeah.
Because what God actually wanted them to do was have the garden become a balloon until it filled the earth.
Got it. Okay, that helps.
Yeah,
I think of inflating a basketball or a balloon. So good. You talked about subdue quite a bit under create, and you have a lot of passion about that. You talked about cultivating both raw material and immaterial.
Yeah, so that's a little bit new. That was a little bit...
Thank you. That did feel new.
Yeah, that was a little bit new. You're cultivating raw materials. Raw materials can be physical, substantive, like you can actually feel, touch it.
Yeah.
And then raw materials can actually be immaterial, words, sounds, thoughts, ideas. Because when you put them together, that's what forms culture, which is why culture is worldview. And worldview is your thoughts and ideas about how you see the world. It informs your stories of the stories that actually make sense. It's your values. It's your beliefs. So all of those are idea related. So they're not physical. They're immaterial, but they're still culture.
Yeah.
And then you have actually the physical, material side of cultivating raw materials.
Yeah. Yes, you said cultivation that leads to culture, then leads to a civilization, and that's where. Yeah, that idea of kingdom comes in.
And then the new part, too, is looking at just using the example of how we break down in our educational system, bachelors of science and a bachelors of art.
Yeah.
Because what we're doing is we're cultivating raw materials in both realms.
Sure. Yeah.
And so some are idea related. Some of them are more of the physical related, of the science behind these things, and you're learning your technical skills. And what I was really trying to do, and I could have bypassed that, but what I was really trying to do is I was trying to make sense of why you go to school.
Yeah.
Like, you just don't go to school because it's the culture thing to do.
Right.
You don't go to school just because you want to. You got to get a job, so I might as well go to school, and then I might as well go to school so I can make more money. Because if I go get a degree and then I get a master's degree and then I get a postgraduate degree, then I can make more money. No, but you do all of those things because as image bearers created in God's image, we are called to cultivate. We're called to create, and so you're cultivating knowledge. And if you actually look at the progression of your education, the more education you have, the more understanding you have in terms of what you actually are creating. You see, when it comes to college, one of the things, like, you learn just enough to be dangerous in a field. But a graduate degree gives you even more actually application, because now you're going deeper into that field, and so you're going to have a deeper understanding, but an understanding of application. You're going to get even more tools. The postgraduate, the doctorate, the PhD actually now helps you to actually create something that might not, in some sense, exist in that field. I mean, that's the whole idea of a PhD, is that you're supposed to now contribute to an area, something new that hasn't been discovered from that field, using other knowledge from that field. So that's where the more you're able to learn and grow and have understanding, actually more of that wisdom is created for you to apply the science or the art behind cultivation, so that you can actually create.
And when we do that, we reflect our God.
And when we do that, we actually reflect our God. So that's where you look at, okay, so, all right, so think about create. All right, so if you're a business owner and you want to create a customer experience, okay, I can absolutely promise you that if you begin to look at the nature and the characteristics and the attributes of God, and you put them over here on the left, and then you would go, okay, I want to create an incredible customer experience. Okay, sure, I can look at books and I can look at business, but hey, listen, as a child of God, be driven by the glory of God. Be driven by representing Him well. And so what you're going to do is that you're going to go, okay, how does this apply? How can I be life-giving in my customer experience? Right?
Yeah.
How can I be communicative in my customer experience? How can I be benevolent in my customer experience? And that's where then now it comes alive. It comes alive in terms of how we're representing God. So when someone then asks you, why do you have such an incredible customer experience? Like, you are getting 4s and 5s on every survey that we see. Well, let me just be honest. Well, we are striving to represent and reflect and mirror the way God has related to us.
That's powerful.
So
I've often heard businessmen and women, leading in a way where they have their Bible open, on their desk throughout their day, and they're constantly, going back. Obviously, Sam Serto does that. Does that so well of business and Bible. I think that's such a great example of how does that really come alive through the framework of God's attributes and His characteristics, and how we can actually put that into practice. I'll give you much to that.
I give you so much to that. So let's say you are in the media, the news section of culture. Then you have to ask yourself, how can I represent God well, in this? Because a lot of times the news media is wanting to feed the culture whatever they want to feed to, in some sense, slant viewpoints. So, but as a Christian, you cannot do that with integrity.
Well, and that doesn't just mean, talking about the spiritual all the time. You have spiritual, social, cultural.
Yeah.
Like, that's not where you're talking about. You're not looking for, saying, hey, the news media should weave in God into everything.
No. You got to look at what's just. You got to look at what is right, what is lovely, what is beautiful, what is generous, what is gracious. What is life-giving, and in some sense you need to report the news like, hey, things are bad, but also report things that are good, and but don't try to slant because because you're trying to mislead with information, because the people do that today. I mean, we saw that with COVID. There was a lot of misinformation and misleading the culture because they wanted to push a narrative. But as Christians, we're actually engaging that realm from a way that we're trying to represent represent and mirror and reflect God well. And sometimes, and this is where it might cost you, is that there might be some environments, there might be some positions, there actually might be some companies, because of the way they're wired, because of the way they conduct business, that you cannot conduct business with integrity and purity of heart, because what they're doing actually is encroaching upon the way that you were meant to image God. And so, but that's where I wanted to put even elements of culture, of hospital and care and government. Like I say, go into government, because government needs to have order. There needs to be processes and systems to care. And so there needs to be oversight. So go. And, but you're doing so by trying to reflect. Now, here's the thing though. This is where the Bible, you need to know the Bible. Okay, so then how do I reflect God's kingdom in a foreign land? Well, Babylon tells us, and we did a whole series on Babylon, is that, sure, there's going to be times where you're going to have to say, I cannot do that because that would go against my king. That would go against my faith. And then you have to pay, then you're going to have to be okay with the consequences. But then there's definitely ways. I mean, you have Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're serving Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel serving King Darius. And so they are actually running and being part of running the Babylonian government, part of running the Persian government. I mean, okay, they're not godly. Awesome. And so that's kind of where now you're combining, and that's why the Bible is this one big story, and that's why we're trying to chart these things out, but from a church perspective. Like that's who we are. That's the reason why I want the church to be involved in the spiritual, the social, and the cultural. So going back to Believe 2050. So churches and campuses, micro churches and missional communities, that's the spiritual sphere. That's where we were wanting to expand the spiritual sphere, disciples.
Replicate and inflate.
Right? Yeah. Then we have the social sphere, which is our mercy road of how we're caring. It's how we're caring for the needs of our community even in a greater way. And so we're meeting needs of those who have special needs and varying exceptionalities. We're meeting the needs of single moms and hopefully later single dads. We're meeting needs of seniors with our senior services. We're meeting needs of seniors in high school with life prep, preparing them for college and life after high school. We have Mercy High, a high school for special needs, 9th through 12th grade. I mean, so we're trying to, and we just want to continue to inflate and expand there to meet the needs. And then when you look at the cultural aspect, and that's where schools come in. Like, we do want to educate. We think that we live in the state, by living in the state of Florida, there's incredible blessing living in the state of Florida where the state kind of gives funding to parents. And so we can use that as a supplemental way to disciple. But it's a way that we actually conduct business in a manner that glorifies God. Good, sound, biblical, and even sound business principles of how we would do that, how we leverage our property for the good of others, but in a benevolent business manner. So we want to be involved in all of these spheres, because what are we showing? We're showing how to represent, reflect, and mirror God in all areas of life.
That's awesome.
So
let's look at that next one, how image bearers will accomplish their why and their what. We talked about this a little bit already, but this is where you drilled into the 3 roles that Adam had.
Yeah.
I do think it was fascinating the way you broke that down. The prophet, priest, and king, first of all, how Adam filled all 3 of those. But then also what that looks like today with Jesus as the king, not you, but Jesus.
Yeah.
And then we're all priests, right? All believers, right? So the children of God, we're all believers. And I like what you said about deacons. Deacons are priests on steroids.
Yeah.
Did you say that in all the gatherings?
I think.
Okay. Priests on steroids. And then the prophets. That's the pastor, elder.
Yeah.
In our context. But you had said we are shattered image bearers who are not reflecting the glory of God. We are reflecting the character, nature, and attributes of Satan. So I had heard you talk about, hey, are we becoming more, being transformed more into the image of Jesus or more into the image of Adam?
Yeah.
But I feel like this time you took it a step further and didn't say, hey, not just Adam, but actually Satan.
Yeah.
Right? That really helped put into stark contrast when you talked about the character, the nature, and the attributes, especially when we've looked at that with God and just obviously the contrast of what those character and attributes would be of Satan.
Yeah. Well, one of the things too that would, and it's really, really important. They will need a leader who leads and lives obediently to the word, because again, in our relationships, in what we create, and how we operate, we need a leader that's constantly reminding us how we're to obey in all of these areas of life. And what we see with Adam, he failed. But here's another thing, though. This is something really cool that, again, just didn't have time to do it. When you study other civilizations at that point, and even when you study the modern civilization that we live in today.
At the point that
this was written.
Yeah,
so with Egypt. I mean, again, I always take Egypt because that was actually a point of reference for them.
Yeah.
They had a king, Pharaoh. They actually had priests.
Yeah.
And they also had prophets, magicians and wise men. Okay, so diviners, and so these were people that helped, kind of make sense out of things. That's what wise men were. That's what magicians were. I mean, when Pharaoh is enlisting the magicians, hey, you need to do this. He wasn't calling the priests to do that. He was calling the magicians.
And they had power.
And so these were the leaders of Egypt to kind of keep them, kind of on task of their worldview. So it's really interesting that when you look at what God's doing at the very beginning, He has a king, a priest, and a prophet, but one person that fulfills kind of all of those roles.
Yeah.
At first. So Adam is the prototype. Which is why when you look at Israel, okay, they're just a foreshadowing of what's to come.
Yeah.
They're just a shadow of what's to come. So God was always supposed to be their king. He was always supposed to be their king.
Which is why it was so devastating when they said, hey, we want a king.
Well, Samuel was ready to tackle somebody. I mean, he was ready to go. I mean, he was offended for God.
Yeah. Am I not enough?
Yeah. And God's like, don't worry, give them what they want. So now you have a king, but they had priests in the tabernacle, serving in the tabernacle, and then later the temple.
Levites.
And then they had a prophet and prophets throughout their history, starting with Moses. Moses was kind of the first prophet. And so what were these three offices supposed to do? Now, in some sense, they were in Israel, they were in some sense three distinct men that were supposed to help keep Israel on track. Well, and that's where and that's what I was trying to get to, is that Adam failed miserably, Israel failed miserably, but then Jesus comes on the scene. And so He is the king, He is the high priest, and He is the prophet.
Yeah, to be clear, he fills all three of those roles.
He fulfills all three of those roles.
Even if all believers are the priests, right? And He is the ultimate priest. And even though pastors, elders fill that prophet.
So and that's where see, this is what Adam failed.
Okay.
Adam was supposed to be the vice regent. That's why I use prince, in for a reason.
Right.
Yes, he's the earthly king.
Yeah.
But he is under the cosmic king. So he is a vice regent. He is a prince.
Yeah.
So he is subservient to the higher.
Yeah.
And so now he is a priest under the authority of the presence of God. So he just doesn't do whatever he wants to do.
Yeah.
Okay, same thing as the prophet. He's supposed to communicate this.
Yeah.
Well, so again, he failed miserably. Israel failed miserably. Now Jesus, he's just going, and this is what makes Jesus so much superior and greater. He is the God-man. He is the cosmic king who has now come into, when I say time and space, He has took on flesh and He's become man. He's fully God, fully man, so that He can occupy now those three roles of king, a priest, and prophet. And so now he's given us his spirit. And so we are now and that's why, like, if you really want, priests are supposed to be pointing to God. Prophets are supposed to be pointing to God. If you are with people who claim to know Jesus, and they're supposed to be priests, but they're not pointing you to God, guess what you ought to do? You ought to disassociate yourself from them. Like, so when you look at church discipline is just a facet of Israel getting kicked out of the temple, getting kicked out of the land, and Adam and Eve getting kicked out of the garden. That was a discipline. They were kicked out because they were supposed to be professing Yahweh. They were supposed to be professing God, but they did not. They rebelled, they committed treason, thereby defaming his name, so they're kicked out. Church discipline ultimately is supposed to be for those who profess the name of Jesus, but actually have a lifestyle, a pattern, consistent lifestyle that isn't reflective of Jesus, and therefore there is discipline. Therefore, that's where you get the prophets and the priests, the pastors, elders, and the deacons that kick them out for redemptive purposes. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah. So that's where it all ties in together.
Yeah. So as we wrap up, let's look at how you ended it, which was this final point of the only way to be fully human, to be fully alive, is to be found fully in Jesus.
Okay. So this is where you got a question in there?
Nope.
You don't?
I just pause and I'll let you go.
Okay. So this is, I wanted to do it. I didn't have time. Like
See, you were ready for it.
I didn't
have to have a question.
Because here's what I wanted to do. We have 4 C's here.
Oh, we do?
Connect, cultivate, care, and commission.
I'm surprised you didn't sing it. Connect, cultivate, care,
you remember
and
that?
commission. I do.
So when you look at what's happening in terms of being fully alive in Jesus, so what was Adam and Eve? What were they commanded to do? They were commanded to relate to God and one another in a manner that reflects God. Here at Northland, we connect with God and others. What are we doing? We are relating to God and others in a manner that God would want to relate to us. And so we are connecting with God and others. And we are connecting in relationships, but we're also connecting in corporate worship gatherings, because it's the assembly of God's people lifting high His name, connecting with Him. So there's the idea of relate. Then cultivate. So subduing the raw materials, making something of the world. And this is where, again, the indignation and the sorrow that I have is that we have treated life groups and we've treated Sunday school and small groups as just another way to learn more information about the Bible. And again, I'm not judging more information about the Bible, but that's the reason why I define discipleship as learning what it means to be human and part of the new human race after the image and likeness of Jesus. So you go to life groups, you go to smaller groups to actually learn more in depth the cultivation of not only the knowledge of the Bible, but actually how it applies to you, cultivating culture and actually giving some kind of reflection of the inbreaking kingdom of God in how you work and what you do in your work and what you're trying to produce with your work. So we cultivate disciples and leaders.
So that's create.
That's create.
Yeah.
Then we care for people and resources. So when you look at operate, they were to operate now what they're bringing into existence. They are to operate what is already in existence, rule over the fish of the sea. I want you to care for my creation. I want you to rule over. I want you to exercise dominion, stewardship, management, oversight. And so I want you to operate in a manner that reflects my kingdom, to reflects my characteristics and attributes. So we care for people and resources. And then the replicate and the inflate is the commission. Is now we're going to take what we are connecting, cultivating, and caring for, and now we're going to go out to, starting with our neighbors and extending it to the nations. We're going to replicate, and we do replicate by inviting people into this good news story of King Jesus, who through His death and resurrection is making all things new. And as we do that, there's this expansion, there's this inflation that happens where God's kingdom is expanded in a spiritual but seen sense until one day, and that's what we read in Matthew 24, is that one day when the gospel of Jesus has been preached to all nations, then the end, and I even say the end of and the beginning happens. The end of what is and the beginning of what's coming happens. The end of the kingdom of man, the end of the rule of the kingdom of man on earth will come to an end, and Jesus will come, and he will then come as a conquering king. And he will conquer the kingdom of man, the kingdom of this world, and they will become the kingdom of our God and King. Which is why I shared that big old yellow circle, because I want you to know that it's happening on earth. Mm-hmm. It's happening on earth. This is what's going to happen on earth. And he's going to restore, renew creation. It will be new creation. And so the only way, and that's the thing, the only way to be fully human, the only way to do what you were created to do, the only way to fulfill the why of human beings is to actually be found fully alive in the God-human Jesus. Jesus is the only way. And when he is the center of your life, because remember, he's Elohim. That's why I've wanted to chart every week, show these themes. That Elohim, we charted Elohim. Jesus is Elohim. Mm-hmm. Jesus is the temple. Mm-hmm. And Jesus is the ultimate image bearer because he is the exact representation of God. Colossians 1:15 says Jesus is he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. Yeah. So he is the image. And if you want to live out what it truly means to be an image bearer, you've got to be in the image bearer, the exact representation, the very icon, the very flesh, when God took on flesh.
Okay, that was cool. You connect to relate, create, operate, replicate, and inflate into the 4 C's.
Oh, yeah. Because we're like, again, that's why you remember we did it as a staff. Mm-hmm. Those 4 C's are seen throughout. Mm-hmm. Those 4 C's are seen throughout Israel. Mm-hmm. They're seen in the church, and at the very end, they're seen there where we will relate, create, and operate forever and ever and ever in eternity with Jesus, and we will no longer have to expand and inflate because it will have already happened.
Right. Oh, that's a cool distinction. Yeah. Yeah.
So
awesome.
That's why I like the Bible. I love the Bible.
It shows.
Yeah. Because it's not just cool information for cool information's sake. You know what I'm saying? And then if it is, then I need to change the way I'm actually trying to communicate it.
Yeah, it's transformative. Yeah, if it's not transformative, then
yeah. So that's why get in a small group and you get to cultivate what it actually means to be a disciple, being conformed into his image and his likeness in every area of life, that we're cultivating that so that you understand what it means to be a husband and a father, understand a wife, mother. That's why our student ministries, we're wanting to cultivate students more into the image of Jesus. So again, it's just what we do. So with that,
amen.
Northland family and friends, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Extra Takes. Like I said, like and share this. All you got to do is go to Spotify, go to your apps, your Apple apps, YouTube, share and like this. Get it out there so that more and more people can have access to more and more discipleship tools to help them understand the Bible even better so that they might be mobilized to actually extend and reflect and represent God's kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven. Blessings.
Thanks for listening to Extra Takes. Be sure to follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts so you won't miss a single episode.